Okay, hey guys, this is Mrs. Talk Talk, and this is going to be our lesson today on energy and life. And really, this is about ATP molecule and how ATP works. So on Friday, we did this POGL. It was a high level POGL. You all thought you couldn't do it. You looked at it and you were like, I can't do this. And I'm like, yes, you can. Just try. And by the end of the class, many of you were successful. So it's awesome. So this is going to be way easier than that, actually. I just want to start you off with something challenging, and then now we'll back down a little bit. So we are starting our unit on cellular energy, and cellular energy, to understand any of that, the first thing we have to understand is what is ATP, what is it used for, like how do cells use ATP. A lot of this is going to be a review of some things we've already learned. So let's get started. This says, remember from Bio 1, which really just means probably remember from maybe even middle school, this word autotroph. This is just a vocabulary word that's in this unit. Autotrophs can make their own food using energy from sunlight. This prefix auto means self, and troph means to feed. So if you want to write those two words down, auto means self, troph means to feed. So these are self-feeders. Anything with chloroplasts will be a self-feeder. And then we also have this word here, heterotrophs. Hetero means mixed, troph means to feed, mixed feeding. So heterotrophs have to get energy by consuming other organisms. So animals and fungi and most bacteria are heterotrophs. They have to obtain food, and they obtain food by different methods. Now, as I said earlier, what do cells use energy for? Well, look at this. Remember we just studied this? Active transport. Here is a nice animation of active transport. You can see on the left side here is a sodium-potassium pump. If you remember, I talked about that with active transport and how nerve cells have to have sodium really, really high on one side of the membrane and potassium on the other. Now you can actually watch this happening, and you can see that this protein here is pumping sodiums to one side of the membrane and potassiums to the other side. And because it's pumping against the concentration gradient, it is requiring energy to do that. And the other thing down here on the bottom right is a picture of endocytosis. That cell is taking some bulk material into itself. So cell transport, active transport, requires energy. And then here's some other things that cells use energy for. It's like suddenly there's a lot of animations going on. You probably maybe recognize this from middle school because you all spent a great deal of time on it. And that's cell division. And so here there's a picture of meiosis happening, cell division. Over here they're showing some lung cells. And these little hairs here, those are called cilia. If you remember cell parts, cilia are short little hairs that move. And that movement of the cilia requires energy. And I'll tell you, this is something kind of gross, but what would biology be if it wasn't gross sometimes? If you really look at this picture and what this picture is showing, this is showing some, like I said, lung cells, or you could think upper respiratory tract. And you have cilia in your upper respiratory tract that are moving. And what are they moving? Well, they're moving all of this green mucus up. And this is called the mucus escalator. And it is moving that mucus up, 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 up until you swallow it. And you don't even know that you swallow it, but you swallow it all day long. Any of that dirt and debris that you breathe in and inhale, and it gets trapped there by these little hairs, and then they start moving it all up, and they kind of put mucus all around it, and then you swallow it, and then you digest it, and you don't even know it. So that's really gross, but that's the mucus escalator there. But that requires energy. And then down here, if we can get myself out of the way, you can see a picture, and maybe you're not real sure what this is, but this is DNA, and a picture of DNA replication is kind of getting started there. And over here is some pictures of protein synthesis and making proteins for the cell. So all of these things require energy by the cell. There we go. Those animations go on. All right. So what kind of energy? Well, There is a special kind of nucleotide used by cells to store and transport energy, and that is adenine with the ribose sugar and the 3 phosphate groups. And so we saw that on Friday, and that molecule is called ATP for adenosine triphosphate. Here it is real big. Whoop. Okay, so you've got your adenine, ribose, and 1, 2, 3 phosphate groups. Now, you see these little negative signs here? I want you to draw those little negative signs on your picture because that's really important. These phosphate groups are negatively charged, and that's important because think about magnets. You know how magnets have like a positive and a negative end sometimes? What happens if you put the 2 negative ends together? They don't want to go together, right? They want to repel each other, so they really don't want to go together. Now you can put them together. Sometimes if you have like a weak magnet, you can kind of force it together, but you can always feel the repulsion there. And that's what's going on here. These phosphate groups, all negatively charged, are repelling each other, but at the same time, notice they're covalently bonded together. So they don't really want to go together, but they're bonded together. So there's enough energy to force that bond there. But like we said, there's a lot of stored potential energy, especially between this last phosphate group, because as soon as that gets, chopped off there by hydrolysis, negative charge, they repel each other, expels a lot of energy. So this is the ATP molecule. That's what cells use to store and release energy. If we go to the next slide, we see ATP can change into ADP, which we learned on Friday is adenosine diphosphate, where di means 2, and yes, bi means 2 also when you're looking at word stems, but di means 2. And when the last phosphate group is hydrolyzed by hydrolysis, now you have ADP. But the cool thing is that this is rechargeable. We can stick a phosphate group back on there at some point and make it ATP and make it a stored potential energy again, which is pretty cool. Let's watch how this works. I think, is this gonna do an animation here? Maybe, maybe not. Oh, here we go. It's like, there we go. Just watch this for a minute. I like to look at these animations. So here's your ATP, hydrolysis, and boom, there's all that energy with your phosphate group that's been left over. So you got ATP, hydrolysis, energy with a phosphate group. And then they're showing it rebonded because it can be rebonded again. We'll look at that process later, but we can stick another phosphate group back on there and make ATP again. So ATP releases energy stored in a high energy chemical bond by removing the phosphate group and becoming ADP. And so if I'm going to just move this over here, we have a little equation. I think you got some fill-ins here. You have ATP, and this is again the yield sign. So maybe you wanted to make it an equal sign on Friday. And in chemical equations, this is an arrow that means it yields something. It's going to become something. So ATP is going to become ADP plus that phosphate group when it's removed by hydrolysis and energy. So you did that on Friday, and there it is again. All right, what else we got? Let's see, some fill in the blanks here. Cells store energy by adding the phosphate back onto ADP to make ATP. And the energy to do this comes from foods. This is why you eat foods like glucose. And when you eat foods like glucose, that energy that's in the glucose ultimately gets used to make ATPs. And that's like recharging the battery. So here's another equation here. Let's get myself out of the way again. And this is really just showing the opposite. If you have ADP and we add on an inorganic phosphate group and some energy, because it does take some energy to force this to bond, because this is negatively charged and these are negatively charged. So there's going to be some energy required to get that to bond. Then you can make ATP again as a stored potential energy. I don't know if we're going to watch that. Maybe just skip it. All right, ATP is great for transferring energy, but not good for storing large amounts of energy for the long term. A single molecule of glucose stores more than 90 times the chemical energy. Now, you don't need to keep all that around, see? And that's the thing. Glucose has a lot more stored energy. But ATP is used kind of on an as-needed basis. And so cells only keep enough ATP around to only last a few seconds and then recharge it by burning glucose. So the glucose there's that glucose molecule there. We've seen that a few times. Glucose is really important, but glucose is important to your cells to make ATP, and then that ATP gets used as needed. So that's kind of what's going on with that. All right, glucose again, yay. And other sugars all can be used to make ATPs. Okay, glucose is needed to burn it. Yeah, cells burn glucose for their energy needs. They burn glucose, but that glucose gets turned into ATPs. I think it's really kind of just all about glucose, and I think we're going to kind of skip that. Yeah. Okay. So, thanks for listening to my presentation. And I think now what I'd like you guys to do is get a book, and I'm going to have you open it and just to complete the guided reading that you picked up when you came in today. There's a guided reading on Chapter 8, Section 1 that I was going to assign for homework, but you probably will have some in-class time to work on that. And I will check it tomorrow, and then we're going to move on tomorrow. We're going to get into some harder stuff. We're going to get into photosynthesis tomorrow. So be ready to learn, because that's going to be a lot harder. This is not, what we did today wasn't hard, but we're going to get into photosynthesis. You're going to really have to be alert and think on a high level. I know you can do that, but just be ready tomorrow. We're going to get into photosynthesis tomorrow, okay? Thanks for listening. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.